5 MCU Disney shows aired in 2021. While all shows have been highly successful, the expectation for one seemed different. Loki was the first Disney Plus Marvel show to have only one leading character, and to feature such a popular one as its lead. The show also promised to expand on the intriguing TVA. When promoting their first 3 shows, Marvel revealed the least information about Loki, relying heavily on the show's atmosphere to create interest, and leaving viewers in the dark regarding its plot and themes. Unsurprisingly, Loki's premiere ended up being the most viewed Disney Plus Marvel show premiere to this day. And in so many ways, Loki delivered on the high expectations set for it. The show's atmosphere, costumes, set design, and score all create an immersive watching experience. Much of the TV's characterization relies on design choices. Their older side of technology accentuates their rigidness. Their omnipotence is emphasized through the overbearing design of their offices, and their threatening nature is hinted at way before it's shown through the well-placed Easter eggs from the first 2 episodes. But still, while watching the show for the first time, we on Fan Talk Team couldn't help but feel like something was a bit off. The show did meet most external expectations from it, and the first 2 episodes were great, but as the show progressed, the less it seemed to meet another set of expectations, the expectations set within the plot. The show's exposition in the first 2 episodes set up a clear idea of what the show is about. The new characters introduced in it, most notably Mobius and Sylvie, had a clear characterization, leading us to picture different roles they could fill within the plot. The deep exploration of Loki's character in episode 1 made us envision the change he could go through in the show, and the ways this change might take place. Mobius' treatment of Loki made us think of the ways he could maybe change Loki for the better. The variant Loki's characterization as a more evil Loki made us think of the effects she could have on our Loki. But from episode 3 onwards, something changed. The expectations set up in the first 2 episodes were not only never met, they became irrelevant, not to be dealt with, forgotten by the show. The story the first 2 episodes tried to sell us is not the one that ended up being told in the rest of the show, and it all seems to have started the moment Sylvie showed up. But first, for those of you who don't remember the entire plot of a show that was released 6 months ago, let's take a look at Loki. Summary. The show Loki starts with Loki escaping the Avengers, as depicted in Avengers Endgame. In the film, Loki uses the Tesseract to run away from the Avengers after the Battle of New York. In the show's first episode, we learn that Loki's freedom didn't last long. Soon after his escape, Loki is captured by the TVA, an authoritarian organization managed by the mysterious Timekeepers, concerned with the seemingly noble objective of preventing the creation of new timelines. Loki is put on trial for his crimes against the sacred timeline, and is sentenced to be reset, which doesn't sound like a very fun time. Luckily for him, he is saved by the TVA agent Mobius. Mobius asks his boss/bestie, Judge Ravonna, to use Loki in an unknown mission. After a long conversation between the two, Loki agrees to help the TVA with their mission, catching an evil version of himself from another timeline. Loki and Mobius become best buddies working on the variant case. A TVA agent who was harmed by the variant is found by the group, and in the chaos that ensues, Loki is left alone with the variant, who turns out to be a woman named Sylvie. Loki is faced with a choice: stay with the TVA, or try to escape with Sylvie. He chooses to go after Sylvie. From this point, the show becomes more fast-paced. Loki and Sylvie try to survive on a planet called Lamentis in an episode generally deemed as the series' worst. Loki discovered that all the TVA agents are variants, and Sylvie isn't evil, she just wants to take the TVA down. Loki and Sylvie fall in love, they get caught by the TVA, Mobius is big mad at Loki for escaping, but Loki is big disappointed in Mobius for not believing him about all the TVA agents being variants. But then, Mobius does some investigating of his own, and finds out that Loki was right. Mobius releases Loki from prison only to immediately get pruned. Loki and Sylvie are taken to the Timekeepers and kill them, revealing that they were fake all along. Loki gets pruned as well, but guess what? He isn't dead, he was just sent to the Void, where he meets loads of other Lokis. Sylvie and Loki go beyond the Void to meet the one truly in charge of the TVA, introduced to us as Kang. Kang explains that while the TVA does sometimes hurt people, ultimately it's for the best, since without the TVA's existence, there would be a war between all the different timelines. Loki and Sylvie are faced with a choice: kill him, end the TVA and potentially start a multiversal war, or take over the TVA themselves, trying to be better leaders than their predecessors. They fight about it, but eventually, Sylvie manages to kill Kang and the war begins. Loki is back at the TVA, this time ruled by a worst version of Kang, where Mobius forgot about his existence. The good stuff. Asgardian God meets space bureaucracy. The first episode of Loki is mostly brilliant. The soundtrack is immersive and memorable, the cinematography and set design are unique and stand out among other Marvel media, and the Mobius-Loki dynamic is both well acted and well written. But the most important role the first episode serves, together with the second episode, is setting our expectations for the rest of the show. Loki is bad, but he's going to change. There are two ideas regarding Loki that the first episode promotes. The first is that Loki's actions are, in fact, harmful. We can like Loki as much as we want, but the episode makes sure we all agree on the amount of damage done by Loki in the Avengers and Thor, and on how wrong of him it was to act in the way it did. The second is that Loki is completely outmatched by the TVA. There are so many moments and scenes in the first episode whose sole target is to show us how powerless Loki is compared to the TVA. Loki is stripped of his powers. The organization that holds him captive is one of the strongest in the MCU, one so strong that they use Infinity Stones as paperweights. They will be able to find him no matter where he tries to escape. The God of Mischief can no longer scheme his way out of things. This forces him to find new ways to deal with his problems, and to get what he wants. Loki has two good reasons to change. For the first time, he's forced to see how his actions hurt those he cares about. That recognition is devastating for him. But he also sees how counterproductive and ineffective his usual ways of dealing with the world are. Whenever he tries to make things better for himself, he just makes them worse. And upon reaching the TVA, his methods have reached the peak of their inefficiency. He won't be able to mansplain, manipulate, magic his way out of this one, guys. His methods won't work, and for the first time, he realizes why he might not want to use them at all. But in order to change, Loki would need some help. Mobius is good, but there are problems with that. If Loki needs a guide on his quest for self-betterment, Mobius is offered to us as a good option. Mobius is a people person. He's kind, he's caring. When he tries to do his job the best way possible, or when he tries as hard as he can to get Loki to help with the mission, he does it because he thinks it helps people. He finds time to calm the girl in the middle of a mission. He prevents other agents from being mean to people on another mission in episode 2. He's so friendly that his relationship with Ravonna is the only long-term friendship seen on the show. Loki is self-centered and rebellious. Mobius is people-oriented and loyal to the organization. Both Mobius and Loki have things to learn from each other. Mobius' loyalty to the system can stand in the way of his caring, so he could use some of Loki's rebelliousness. Loki should definitely rethink his values, but thinking more about others might be a good place to start. Mobius needs Loki to achieve his mission. Loki needs Mobius to survive. Now that they both rely on each other, we're in a perfect spot for that learning to happen. The variant is going to ruin our boy. Or not. Loki's confession at the end of the first episode,
I don't enjoy hurting people,
might seem a little contrived, but it's actually both perfectly in character for him and has already been set up by the show. Loki explains to Mobius that his underlying motivation is the belief that he's better than everyone, and therefore the only one who's capable of making the right decision for people and rule them.
For nearly every living thing, choice breeds shame and uncertainty and regret. There's a fork in every road, yet the wrong path always taken.
Good. Yeah. You said nearly every living thing, so I'm guessing you don't fall into that category.
But encountering such an overwhelmingly powerful force as the TVA makes him realize that those assumptions are false, just beliefs he uses to avoid dealing with his insecurities.
It's the cruel, elaborate trick conjured by the weak to inspire fear.
So that's it then. Character arc done, right? Well, the introduction of a variant Loki that is such a big threat to the TVA complicates Loki's new enlightenment. The thought that maybe he could be more powerful than the TVA after all make him regress and try to join the variant Loki in his evil doings instead. There's also Loki's need to prove he's the superior Loki to complicate things. So, what we've got here is an excellent source for drama and character development. Will Loki stay with Mobius and learn to care about people like he does? Or will he join the variant Loki and want to take over the universe again? The variant is gonna ruin our boy. Probably. Let's look at how the variant Loki is set up in the first 2 episodes of the series. We meet one of our main characters, Mobius, in the middle of investigating a crime scene in a church. They're surrounded with bodies and discuss how they were stabbed in the back, not knowing what hit them. Then, a little kid comes into the frame. After befriending them and showing them a nice futuristic toy, Mobius asks the kid,
Tu sais qui a fait ça?
The variant Loki's first appearance in the entire series is at the end of the first episode, where they are seen burning a bunch of people alive, in one of the MCU's most graphic displays of violence to this day. Already this gives us a very strong impression. Not only did this person murder a bunch of people in an extremely cruel way, they're apparently so evil that a child thought they were the actual devil, or at least comparable to him. So evil that they were allowed to burn people alive on a Disney Plus show. But it's not only their actions that show us how bad this other Loki is. It's the fact that Mobius, who was shown so far to be a decent person, is willing to recruit our Loki, a person who has recently tried to take over the Earth and is, by Mobius's own words, dangerous and treacherous, in order to fight them. Another thing that is set up about this variant Loki is that they can do something our Loki can't: take over people's bodies and invade their minds. If you've written a villain with that ability, especially if they were Loki, then what you should do is kiss yourself, because that creates so many interesting possibilities. If there's one thing our Loki likes, is having power over people, taking away their control. Imagine what he would do with that ability. Take over the biggest celebrity in the universe just so he can make them do humiliating things. He'd make the US president start a nuclear war. He'd emotionally torture people with their darker secrets and fears for fun. And yeah, that's pretty much all the things set up about them. This other Loki can take over people's minds and is very evil. So we get 2 triangles here. The first, the Loki, Mobius, Dark Loki triangle, is centered around Loki and his need to change. Mobius could help him in that process. Dark Loki could prevent that process from happening. The second, the Mobius, Loki, Ravonna triangle, is centered around Mobius and his trust towards the TVA. Loki could challenge Mobius's complete trust of the TVA, which might be a good thing for him. Ravonna, everyone's favorite TVA loyalist, could push back against that change. And if you're thinking, well, why would Mobius's view of the TVA matter so much to the show? That's because the TVA is weird. The TVA is weird. These folks are messed up. Yeah, their job is essential, but why be so creepy about it? Besides their whole vibe being weird, their authoritarian nature and near omnipotence makes them very hard for us to trust as viewers. Placing bad guy Loki against the possibly bad TVA and expecting him to be good is a very interesting premise for 5 more episodes. Making us like good guy Mobius and at the same time having him work for the TVA makes for an even more interesting premise. Indicating that the relationship between these two would be one of the main focuses of the show, and each character's growth will depend on the other, makes it one of the most intriguing things about the first episode. Let's see how well they manage to follow all that up, shall we? The Sylvie Problem. The thing that's most interesting about the problems with the writing on Loki is that most, if not all of them, stem from the presence of Sylvie. Sylvie is a really bad character. Like, really bad. She's not only bad as a character on her own, but completely fails as a device to explore Loki's character, and her presence prevents other, more interesting plotlines and relationships from happening. When we talked about the expectations we developed after the first 2 episodes, we refer to Sylvie as Dark Loki, because that's what the series led us to believe about her character. Loki, but worse. Now, let's take a look at how she fails at being both aspects of this character. She isn't dark, and she isn't Loki. Part 1. Sylvie isn't dark. After 2 episodes of burning people alive, taking over their bodies just for the fun of it, and killing them to the sound of severely underrated 80s bops, Dark Loki is finally introduced to us in the 3rd episode. And suddenly she's a heroic fighter for justice who never did anything wrong in her life. We are constantly told how hard her life was, how helpless she has been against the TVA as a child, and how brave she is for fighting the people who took her away from her family and tried to kill her. We even get a flashback of this exact moment.
And swoops towards the palace. But Valkyrie flies over, defeats the dragon, and saves Asgard.
There's our variant. On the authority of the Timekeepers, I hereby arrest you for crimes against the sacred timeline. Reset it.
Wait!
And you might say they're subverting our expectations, but that's not how that works. In order to subvert the audience's expectations, you need to take a well-known trope that they recognize and turn it on its head, while making narrative sense. For example, killing Ned Stark in Game of Thrones subverts our expectation that our honorable main character has plot armor and that he would survive even the most dire of situations. The execution of Ned makes sense narratively, because we've seen the abhorrent behavior of King Joffrey and we know Ned has done something to offend him. The message is clear. In this world, no one is safe, and mistakes have consequences. But Sylvie being just really good, actually, that's just bad payoff. You can't have a child say someone's the devil, and you can't have her do so many horrible things for no apparent reason, and then turn around and say, well, she was always good. She was just fighting the TVA. That's not subversion. That's intentional misleading that they then promptly ignore. They even have the audacity to include this scene.
By the way, you did some annihilating too.
I did what I had to do.
It's nice to have an acknowledgement of all the horrible things she did, but her justification is never questioned, and Mobius is presented as just being completely in the wrong. The writers wanted to look clever by going, oh, you thought Sylvie was the villain? Oh, well, looks like you judged her all wrong. Check your assumptions, when they were the ones facilitating those exact assumptions. And I get what they were actually trying to do. They were trying to reframe the TVA by showing how an individual they deemed bad is good, actually. But not only is the execution of this terrible, we got to see her from the perspective of someone who isn't the TVA. Again, a literal child said she's Satan. It's also pretty redundant. The TVA was presented as basically an Orwellian nightmare since the first minutes of the very first episode, with an agent punching Loki and reveling in the suffering she's causing him, and with their cold and apathetic bureaucracy that seemingly doesn't care at all about the variant's well-being. We even see a person get executed simply because they don't have a ticket. There was room here for a Dark Loki, for an ultra-powerful version of our protagonist who achieved everything he ever wanted, the version of himself that he must resist becoming. That would be interesting. But the writers threw all that away in favor of Sylvie good, TVA bad. Part 2. Sylvie isn't Loki. Now, I think this part of her character is something that both the show and Sylvie herself would actually agree upon. From her very direct way of doing things in opposition to Loki's lies and manipulations, through her unique powers and down to her outright refusal to even be called Loki, Sylvie makes it clear that she is her own person with her own history. She's even based on a completely different character from the comics, Enchantress, but that's not a good thing. Sylvie is supposed to be a different version of Loki. Her identity as a different Loki has a role to serve. You see, the show frames Loki as an egoist who needs to learn to love others, but instead, through his twisted romance with Sylvie, falls in love with himself.
What a incredible seismic narcissist! You fell for yourself!
The ultimate proof of his self-centeredness. But his and Sylvie's characterization completely contradicts this idea. Loki's affection for Sylvie isn't some sort of sexier version of self-love. All the things he appreciates about Sylvie are things that he lacks. She learned her magic independently, she fought against the TVA all her life, and she actually won several times. Since Sylvie is a completely different person to Loki in any meaningful way, his love for her can't symbolize his love for himself. The characteristic of self-centeredness doesn't actually work here. Loki hasn't learned to love a version of Loki and therefore himself. He just likes Sylvie because she's a strong and independent woman, but we'll touch more on that later. Another contradiction that occurs because of this is Sylvie's view of our Loki. Right from their first conversations in episode 3, Sylvie proclaims that she can't trust Loki. But she really has no reason to think this. We as the audience know that Loki is untrustworthy because we've seen him betray people countless times, but as we've established, Sylvie isn't Loki. She isn't untrustworthy. She has no reason to believe this variant of hers will be. You could say that she knows he betrayed the TVA, but he only did that for her. He wanted them to work together against the TVA. And sure, he tried to arrest her in the beginning of episode 3, but she's the one who refused his offer and fought him in the supermarket just seconds before. She has no reason to find Loki untrustworthy, except for the fact that we, the audience, know that's one of his character flaws. Not only does she not have any reason to think Loki can be trusted at the beginning, he repeatedly shows her that he can be trusted throughout their time together. They work together to escape Lamentus, they fight the Timekeepers, and they take on Alioth. She even prunes herself for the chance to be with Loki again. The result of all this is that when episode 6 rolls around, when Sylvie and Loki are arguing over whether to kill Kang and let the multiverses run wild, they have this interaction.
Because you can't trust. And I can't be trusted.
It feels completely unjustified. What reason does Sylvie actually have to think Loki is just after the throne again? Especially when just minutes before, Ms. Minutes offered Loki precisely that, and he refused. The answer we're provided from the series is, she has no reason. She simply wants revenge, and she will do anything to get it. Even fighting the person the show wants us to think she's in love with. Where Loki is presented as a person who has overcome his toxic desires, who no longer lusts after power and actually cares about people, Sylvie is single-minded, resistant to change, and has no underlying logic to her decisions. The show tries to present the choice Kang offers them at the end as morally ambiguous, but this framing of the characters harms our ability to think of it as such. Loki presents logical arguments for his opinion, while Sylvie's are emotional and don't make much sense. The last lines of the fight demonstrate this idea perfectly. In his last plea, Loki reaffirms his love and care for Sylvie, and his lack of desire for power. He tells her he knows how she used to feel, something which strengthens his appearance of growth in our eyes in relation to Sylvie, who we understand to not have gone through the same change.
I just want you to be okay.
And what does she have to say in response?
But I'm not you.
And that's the true problem. That by being obsessed with Sylvie not being Loki, the writers have stripped her of any kind of personality or understandable growth she could have. The entire basis of her character and the themes they were trying to convey with her are inherently flawed. Part 3. Sylvie, Sylvie, Sylvie. The presence of Sylvie is not only bad in and of itself, it's also bad because it means the lack of presence of other more interesting agents in the story, mainly Mobius. The moment Loki lives with Sylvie, Mobius becomes basically a glorified extra, with almost no meaningful actions that impact the plot in any way. His relationship with Loki also grounds to a halt, and they merely get one moment of Mobius trying to save Loki from his prison before he's pruned. All the interesting and fun dynamic they established between the two in the first couple of episodes almost entirely disappears from the show, because any time that could have been spent on their relationship is instead invested in Sylvie and Loki's relationship instead. Another arc that gets downgraded because of Sylvie is Loki's. Like we, and the show established, the arc that would make most sense for post-Avengers Loki to have is the struggle between someone who challenges him and represents morality and caring for others, Mobius, and someone who enables him and represents power, hedonism, and everything Loki has ever wanted, Dark Loki. He needs to resist temptation and choose love and friendship over his shallow desires. But making Sylvie be just actually good completely annihilates this opportunity for drama and development, and instead forces Loki to basically become automatically good himself. Think about it. During episode 2, he's maybe still morally ambiguous. He flips between actually helping Mobius and betraying him. But the minute he meets Sylvie, he has to just be good, because otherwise Sylvie would never like him, and we need them to fall in love by the next episode. And speaking of the romance, the decision to make Loki and Sylvie fall in love completely doomed episode 3. The entire thing is dedicated to trying to justify the romance in an incredibly awkward way. On the train, they immediately make small talk and start babbling about their past and the nature of love for absolutely no reason. It's awkward and forced. Compare this to when Mobius and Loki have their heart-to-heart. With them, it doesn't feel as awkward because we understand they're in a constant state of trying to manipulate each other. Mobius is trying to get Loki to help him catch Sylvie, and Loki is trying to get Mobius to give him an audience with the Timekeepers. They have a reason to try to find out everything they can from one another, while trying to get the other to trust them. With Loki and Sylvie, they're just together on a train, trying to escape an apocalypse. There's no reason for them to be so open and candid and talk about how love is hate or mischief or a dagger. The only reason is that they need to be in love by the start of the next episode because the writers decided they should be. Sylvie doesn't try to make Loki worse. Mobius can no longer try to make him better. The interesting Loki-Mobius dynamic is thrown away, only to be replaced by the awkward Sylvie-Loki. Both dynamics don't end up working. Part 4. Sylvie's just not interesting. Like we already talked about, at the beginning of the show, Sylvie was established as a mysterious figure with a manipulative and untrustworthy personality. Her power is taking over people's minds. That's such an interesting premise for a character like Loki, because her powers are inherently about taking other people's power and agency. There are so many things you could do with a character like that, which is really the thing that's most astonishing when you look at the character we got. A person who only wants to punch her way out of things, choosing the most direct path possible. From episode 3 on, she only uses her enchantment to take over someone's body once, and that's to get them on a train. The writer spent all that time in the first 2 episodes setting up a clear characterization for Sylvie, only to throw it all away and basically start from scratch. This leaves Sylvie's character feeling shallow and uninteresting. Instead of a cunning manipulator, we get a strong female character. And let's talk about that for a second, because I feel like Sylvie is basically the epitome of everything wrong with that. So, she's strong in the physical sense, which is fine, but not only that, the narrative goes out of its way to show us how much more competent Sylvie is compared to everyone else, particularly Loki. This is especially visible in episode 5, where she just shows up at the end of the universe and immediately has a plan that's deemed obviously better than Loki's.
Kill it?
Yes, we're gonna kill Goliath.
Oh my god, that was your plan.
Yeah.
And you all went along with it.
But none is more egregious than this interaction.
Have any of you met a woman variant of us?
Sounds terrifying.
Oh, she is. But that's kind of what's great about her.
Why is she singled out as the only woman variant? Why does that sound terrifying? I can only assume that with this scene and with Sylvie's entire character being hyper-competent, the writers were trying to be feminist? But this is exactly the problem with the strong female character. We don't need Sylvie to be the most perfectly capable person ever. We need her to just be a person. Instead, we get someone who is better at everything than everyone. Why? Oh, because she's a woman, of course, and everyone knows women are better than men. That's feminism, apparently. When you prioritize making a character strong instead of giving her an actual personality and flaws, you end up with a character that's not only completely bland, but arguably the opposite of feminist. At the end of the day, when you try to examine Sylvie's character, there's not a lot there. She's been on the run since she was a child, she likes punching, she can take over people's bodies, and she wants revenge against the TVA. That's basically it. The series tries to convince us that she's really complex, that she's struggling between a relationship with Loki and her need for revenge, and eventually gives in to that need despite everything. But because she herself doesn't have a lot of personality, and because her romance with Loki feels incredibly forced, she remains just a woman who wants revenge all throughout the series. And this is by no means the fault of her actress. In my opinion, Sofia Di Martino does a great job with the interpretation of the character. Sadly, with a character so badly written, there's a limit to what an actor can do. Fixing Loki. So, if this is one of your regular Think Bad videos, I could have ended it here. But that's the interesting thing about Loki. It wasn't just a bad show. It was a show that could have been so much better. I don't just want to rant about how bad the show is, I want to rant about how good it could have been. Since watching the first episode, I've begun to assemble a narrative according to which the show could go. Most of it in accordance with the expectations we talked about in the beginning. So, I want to share with you how I would have written Loki. Perhaps unsurprisingly, I'd leave the first 2 episodes pretty much the way they are. Maybe give Loki and Mobius a bit more time together before Loki's betrayal, so that their friendship would feel more meaningful and Loki's betrayal more impactful. I would also put more emphasis on demonstrating Loki's character flaws and their consequences. The isolation caused by a lifetime of manipulation, the hurt he put others through due to his egocentric nature, and the way his attempts to gain power stand in the way of his need for meaningful relationships. The final thing I would change is at the end of episode 2. Instead of Dark Loki rejecting Loki's offer of cooperation, they would instead be seducing Loki to join them and rule together, thereby representing Loki's darkest impulses. Loki would be faced with the choice of whether to stay with someone who challenges him but actually cares about him, or give in to his lust for power and narcissism. After Loki leaves, Mobius feels incredibly betrayed and reacts badly. Either he'd become obsessed with capturing Loki, or he'd just completely give up on him. Either way, whatever little trust he had in Loki is gone. Meanwhile, Dark Loki shows Loki their empire. Instead of hiding, Dark Loki has become so powerful that even the TVA can't stop them, and now rules over a planet. Dark Loki offers Loki to rule with him and for them to take over the TVA together. Dark Loki teaches Loki how to enchant. Maybe they even get romantically involved? Loki has everything he ever wanted. An empire to control and the ability to self-indulge in his love affair with himself. But something's wrong. He's not happy. Only after achieving all of his dreams, Loki realizes how empty they were. Thanks to his stay in the TVA, Loki can finally imagine an alternative to them. Loki betrays Dark Loki and tricks them into going into the TVA together. They both get arrested. Mobius is still angry at Loki for betraying him and doesn't believe him when he says he's changed his mind. Like in the show, Loki tells Mobius that he and all the other employees of the TVA are variants, and Mobius doesn't believe him, but still has a feeling that something is wrong. He asks Ravonna to question Dark Loki, but Ravonna refuses repeatedly, eventually revealing that Dark Loki got pruned. This shakes his belief in the TVA and causes him to steal Ravonna's tempad and visit Loki in prison. Mobius questions Loki about the whole him being a variant thing, and Loki says he can prove it to him through enchantment. In a defining act of trust, Mobius lets Loki into his mind, and Loki brings his memories back. When they're found by Ravonna, they run away together and hide in an apocalypse. Loki's idea. They have a discussion about what to do next. Loki just wants to run away with Mobius and have nothing to do with the TVA. Mobius, however, is intent on going back and saving everyone. Eventually, Mobius convinces Loki to come with him and bring down the TVA. Loki and Mobius sneak into the TVA. Loki connects to the TVA's computer mainframe and enchants everyone in the TVA. Maybe there will even be a self-sacrifice plot where Loki thinks enchanting all these people is too much effort and it will kill him, but still does it anyway, thus completing his arc from a power-hungry egocentric to someone who cares about people. Mobius makes a big speech about how the TVA is bad and lied to them and they should all revolt. Ravonna also gets her memories back, but still fights to protect the system. Mobius and her have a final fight, and Mobius wins. Loki survives because, of course he does, and everyone's happy. When they break into the Timekeeper's chambers, they discover Kang, who basically explains the whole multiverse of war thing the same way he did in episode 6. The TVA is down. It's too late to change anything. Mobius and Loki share a look, realizing that bad things are coming. Then, cut. The end. Roll credits. Conclusion. All in all, Loki is a pretty interesting example of how important the groundwork a show lays is to its ability to tell a story effectively. The first couple of episodes were filled with interesting environments, characters, and dynamics, but they were mostly thrown away to make room for a poorly constructed love interest. Our rewrite of the show was not intended as a way to fix it as much as it was a way to explore what the show could have looked like if it followed through on the expectations set up in it in a better way. A way in which our main characters go through a clear arc as a result of interacting with their environment and each other. One where the drama and conflict are not abandoned, but expanded on. And one in which the messaging is consistent and meaningful. Loki isn't a terrible show. It's fine. It's enjoyable. And a few things in it are even great. But it could have really been something special. Instead, it's just another Disney show with fun twists and a strong female character. But who knows? Maybe season 2 will be better. If not, well, you know where to find us. Thanks for watching.